Hey, all movie freaks. I am Frank, and today I'm here with Alex Schumacher. Alex, how are you doing today?
I am loving life right now, Frank. It's
That's
pretty
what.
good stuff. The book just came out, and as we were chatting about a little bit before we started recording, just had the book launch party, which was fantastic, and had a number of people there who were associated with the production of the book, which makes the day just that much more special to have the entire team that should be celebrating it with you.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the effects of pickled herring, the book that you're bringing with us today?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a literal coming of age story because it has the cultural aspect of the barn bat mitzvah, but they're also dealing with a very adult issue in that their grandmother is starting to suffer from cognitive decline. So that's the main sort of through line in the story that we follow. But it's about not just the cultural aspect, because I did want to share that Judaism is very important to me, as are my grandparents, so it's a love letter to both of them. But it's also a celebration of young people, and we don't, as adults, often bring them into the conversation all the time in ways that are meaningful to them.
Hmm.
So part of this book is about bringing younger readers into the conversation about cognitive decline, about asking questions, about forming your own opinion based on questions and information, and also a conversation about what it can feel like to be a kid in what sometimes really appears to be an adults only world.
Hmm.
So much of the inspiration is probably 50-50. So half of it was probably my grandparents and the Jewish culture sort of wrapped into one half. And the other half is just being influenced by the new demographic that I'm writing for, because this is, as you know, a little bit of a shift for me,
Yeah.
since I'm mostly focused on a little bit more adult oriented, mature material. Um, so yeah, so that was definitely, it had to be an inspiration, because you can't write for both of those demographics in the same way. And it's, I see it as an opportunity and an honor to talk to them about those things too, and try to speak to them like they're real people because they are.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot of you hear the confusion in Micah's voice and stuff like that as he's experiencing just touches of what's going on in his family. But what I love is there's panic and confusion in in his mother's voice as well, and with his grandfather. How did you try to capture that for a new audience? How hard was it to kind of shift gears into a younger audience?
I mean, honestly, a lot of the differences were mainly things like smartphones and some of the slang.
Yeah.
As far as the anxiety, I don't know if it's the nice part about it, but one of the things about using anxiety in a story is it's always relatable. Now, thankfully, we're having more open discussions about that now. So there's more likelihood that younger audiences are going to be able to relate and become part of that transaction in the story where they're supposed to relate to things. So the anxiety part, I was drawing on my own experience a lot. I think, as most writers do when they're talking about mental health issues or anxiety issues, which are all part of that. So there's not a lot of conversation about those in some of the older books that are aimed at young people, because, and I understand the impulse to maybe want to shield them, or keep their innocence, or whatever the thought behind it might be. But I also think that's damaging in a lot of ways and does a
Hmm.
disservice to kids, because they are experiencing them. They do have complex lives, both emotionally and mentally and physically. There's a lot going on with them. So the night, the using something like anxiety is going to be drawn from personal experience, but there's no time limit to where that stays relevant. I just,
Yeah.
we're able to have more of a conversation now about that, and have more of that dialogue where we talk about normalizing it too. That's a huge aspect of it.
Yeah.
Telling people it's okay if you feel this way. That doesn't make you weird. That doesn't make you abnormal. These are very human feelings and concerns that we're having. And I think younger audiences need ways to talk about that, and need books need to be represented in some of their literature. I think it makes a big difference, as it has with a lot of the books coming out right now. The representation with the LGBTQIA community and people of color and women in general. There's this fantastic, representation that's being welcomed right now. So to take part in that even just a little bit through, Judaism or anxiety, and being able to offer more representation, like I said, I take it very seriously. It's a duty I don't take lightly.
Speaking of the complex issue of anxiety, page 91, I think you did a great job of kind of as soon as Micah said it, I was like, I get that. When he talks about I need a break from my own brain and
Oh yeah.
the brain walking away, there it is, that one. And I was like, oh, Micah, you're gonna feel like that a lot in the future, buddy.
Yep, yep. And those are sort of when the age when those feelings start to crystallize, and you start seeing it very clearly as
Yeah,
to how you're feeling, and like needing those vacations from your brain, like you said, just something that we've all experienced at some point or another.
yeah. Um, Clearly the first layer story here is the bar and bat mitzvah. How do you use those to kind of progress the story? Because I know in the beginning we're starting off with them both as children and they're becoming adults by the end of the story. How does that affect the other stories going on?
I think of it in sort of musical suites to a degree, because comics can have suites too,
Hmm.
and suit.
Hmm.
um, and so I kind of think of it in that way. So when I'm, the through line, like you said, is the bar mitzvah, and we're following Micah and Alana preparing for that. And so as kind of the tension starts to rise while they're studying, and the date of their actual ceremony is growing closer and closer, so that's creating tension, while also kind of peppering in the anxieties of just about being a preteen, and then the anxieties about seeing grandma's mind kind of start to crumble a little bit. So it was that was the main sort of ingredient that I used to fold everything else in. So like I said, it's sort of the sweets, and as
Yeah.
it builds, there's that big kind of crescendo at the end, and then the resolution, and
Hmm.
that's kind of how I think of it. It's a rise, rise, rise. Everything becomes more tense. Micah becomes a little bit more irritable.
Yeah.
Everybody else does. It's a huge ceremony, and it can be quite stressful. Especially for people who don't have a lot of means, and are pulling it together on a shoestring budget, and then things start to fall apart, just as plans do. We make plans, God laughs, that whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was all supposed to work together in that suite to kind of build it to the climax. So yes,
Yeah.
the main one being the bar mitzvah, and then everything else being sort of the counterpoints and the counter melodies, helping to bring that to the final note,
Well
if you
said. Yeah. Now we're seeing this through Micah's eyes, and again, the tension's constantly rising for him. But a lot
will.
of times when he's looking at his sister Alana, she seems so confident. Is that just her coping in a different way?
Yeah, oh, for sure. And I think that happens a lot with people, especially when you're young and you have the access to the quote unquote popular crowd, or at least the crowd that doesn't get, pantsed every day or whatever the case may be. Hopefully kids don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, when you have kind of access to that other world, I do think that's an escape in and of itself. So Alana found herself, um, associating with other people who she does have connections with. She does build real bonds with. So it's not just merely for escape, but sometimes hobbies, some friendships, other things, those can be escapes in and of themselves. So it was all part of that hatch for her, where she could kind of get out of her own head, get out of her own life, really. Where Micah does that internally, Alana does that externally. So
Yeah.
Micah has all of the daydreams and the nightmares, and he internalizes everything, where it manifests itself in Alana by being this social butterfly, by being this, open, happy, inviting person who everybody loves. So it's
Mhm.
definitely, a costume to some degree, or a mask she's wearing, which, not too much of a spoiler, but we do see some of that mask start
Yeah.
to fade a little as the story goes,
Some
which
of
is
the
also
really nice conversations between brother and sister that are like, "Oh, we're both on the same page. It's just we're trying to hide it a little bit or handle it different ways." Yeah.
yeah. Sometimes we need reminders that our families and us are generally on the same side.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
sometimes we don't always say it as well as we intend to, and those can be tough conversations. But yeah, I think, and that's the root of a lot of my stories because they come from my family and friends. So I think they're rooted in that idea that yes, we're going to have our differences, yes, we're going to have our disagreements, but we are on the same team. And the only way any of us are going to succeed or survive in this life is by acknowledging that and working together.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Micah's mom, she seems to start to maybe unravel a little bit. Or there's one particular line that was very impactful to me where she's talking about, "I just need to make sure that your grandmother's here for your uh, bar mitzvah." I think she says at the time.
Mm.
Um, is that something that maybe, because this was a love letter to your grandparents, is that something you experienced through your own parents?
Not for the bar mitzvah. So the two sort of big topics that we're talking about, which is bar and bat mitzvah, ascending to adulthood, and Alzheimer's,
Hmm.
essentially. Those happened at very different times in my life. So
Okay.
that part, the timelines where they're running parallel in the story, I just kind of manipulated,
Hmm.
reality. It wasn't chronologically accurate, as it were,
Okay.
but all the feelings are still derived from that experience. But for the story, like you were talking about, to sort of help propel it, it couldn't just be that cultural, coming of age, that
Hmm.
literal coming of age. There had to be something else that was bolstering it, something else that they were dealing with outside of that. So it occurred to me that maybe that was an opportunity to bring up cognitive decline to a younger audience. And the feedback that I've gotten so far has thankfully been, mostly praised about
Yeah.
how I presented it, and seems to be in a way that, it talks to kids on all of their levels, not the superficial ones, but in language they can also follow and understand.
Yeah, I believe, I've lived this story on two different fronts where I've been the kid who's kind of learning for the first time and the adult that's trying to explain it to nephew and nieces of like what's going on right now.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of things that I saw so much in the mom that seems so familiar where it's like suddenly there's almost like a rush to things, but you're also trying to enjoy the moments you have. And I really liked how almost felt like out of nowhere Aunt Sarah shows up and she's hanging out at the hospital too. There's like aunts and uncles that start coming in more often that you don't normally see until holidays. And yeah, it's just that shift in the entire family's focus to, hey, for the next couple months, we're going to be here doing this thing for a while. And um, yeah, that's difficult for kids to fully understand. But as an adult, you recognize the situation they're in right now.
Yeah, and I think there are kids who may not necessarily like think about that and contextualize it in the moment,
Yeah.
but were they to read this book, they would find some things very familiar. Hopefully, I
Hmm.
think they would, because a lot of them have been put through that and just don't really understand again how to process that and
Right.
what's really happening. And for the more mature adult readers, if they're reading this with their kids or reading them by themselves, those are the indications when they start having family come by
Yeah.
and doctors are making sure that family coming in. That's a very clear indication of a very particular thing. And
Hmm.
Mike and Alana are kind of oblivious to it because as a kid, you don't know that. But there are things like that sprinkled throughout as well that will be very clear signs of what's happening maybe to adults or people who have gone through it, and then that becomes a way to bridge that gap between parent and kid, maybe where
Yeah.
they can have a discussion about it, which is what I hope this book will do for people.
Yeah, it was really well done in that it wasn't hamstrung. Like the ending was, well, no spoilers, of course, but was very realistic, and I liked that a lot.
Thank you.
And you just feel for the grandfather, the people that are going to live this new life, and everybody
Yeah,
involved. In it was really well done.
yeah, and that's really, a new normal is kind of a theme that runs throughout it as well. Not just in this sort of Jewish community where they're now going to be considered adults and expected to, follow the commandments and
Mhm.
perform mitzvahs, but also, in this sense that they are almost becoming the adults where the grandparents are reverting.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of pendulum that swings too.
Yeah. Micah, he goes, this is kind of mid book. He almost wants to escape the situation he's in for whatever reason, we'll say. And he goes to his grandparents' house. And while he's there, I think he's starting to realize his role shifting as a grandson to be a little more caretakery and sitting with his grandfather who's dealing with him stuff. And yeah, you're
Yeah.
starting to see that transition in that character alone.
Oh, that's a very uh, kind of a obvious new normal moment, I think, for Micah.
Mhm.
That's one of the times where he really experiences the decline firsthand.
Yeah.
Whereas before, it's these, little anecdotes, little silly stories where you can brush off, especially, when you're younger, you can brush
Right.
off as being something that old people do. Old people forget their pants sometimes. Sure, that
Yeah.
makes sense when you're 12. Uh, but he never experienced it. Yeah, and again, not to go into specifics to ruin it
Mhm.
for people, but at that moment, he experiences in such a way that it's so visceral.
Right.
There's no escaping it anymore. And kind of from that point forward, some of the daydreaming, some of those things
Oh, yeah.
go away because it's kind of him starting to accept that.
Yeah, and the dreaming changes, to,
Right.
a whole new focus, a whole new fear is arising that maybe
Yeah.
wasn't there before.
And that's almost kind of a culmination of some of the feelings that he may have been suppressing and kind of you know pushing down because he knew he needed to be there for his grandmother. So a
Right.
lot of that, again, some the escapism, he stopped doing that. So to some degree, that part, that sequence where it really is kind of coming to a head, that's a lot of built up tension.
Yeah.
It's like the cannons in Pocketbook Ken. It's like you're waiting for that the whole time,
Yeah.
and then they arrive. That's sort of my moment for that.
Yeah, and even when he returns, the first thing he does is he tells his sister it's worse than we thought. Because of course, them being on outside of the loop and stuff like that, they're trying to form their own opinions of what's going on. And after that, he goes back to her and it's like, no, this is different than we thought it was. And their imaginations could never live to what the reality is. And he's coming back with bad news, unfortunately.
Yeah, and she still has a little bit of time to be able to pretend it's not real.
Yeah.
And I think Micah kind of envies her that a little bit. So that's why there's still a little bit of lingering tension between them,
Mhm.
even in the third act a little bit.
Yeah.
Just because he's almost upset that or mad to some degree that he's discovered this terrible thing to actually be true. It's
Mhm.
not just rumors and whispers in their family anymore. He's seen it firsthand. He's had the floor show,
Yeah.
and he wishes he could take that all back. And he knows it was his responsibility for being there at that time too. So
Yeah.
it's all of those complexities that kids do deal with all the time. And I'm trying to put that in there, again for them because I
Mhm.
think they deserve that. They
Yeah.
deserve stories that you know accurately show what they're thinking
And there's even a
or try.
maturity to Alana where she's like not here at school, like she knows the bad news is coming, but like to not deal with it right now. I have to do school and like you're wrong place, wrong time. It's like she already knows the news, she already knows the information. She just knows when it's best to process and it's not right now. So
Right.
there's
Oh, and she absolutely knows. There are several times without saying it verbatim, but Micah acknowledges that she's much smarter than he is.
mhm,
So she's more capable of puzzle solving, and he's well aware of that.
yeah,
And in a lot of ways, and I hope this comes across. It's not envy of his sister so much as it is admiration.
yeah,
He holds her in such high regard that he's hurt by the fact that she has a new group of friends, and that's nothing that's personal, but that's just how much he respects her and admires her and wants
mhm,
to hang out with her. So she definitely knew what it was before Mike did, and was just, I guess, delaying the inevitable of hearing it out loud because that's when it becomes
yeah,
real.
yeah.
When you say it, when he tells her what he saw. Um, so yeah, I think Alana picked up on things a lot quicker than Micah, because again, when you are when your escapism is external, I think like Alana, you're still perceptive and you're still observant.
Hmm.
So you tend to still pick up on things. Whereas when that escape is internal, you're inside your head, and a lot of things escape you. A lot of things get past you.
Yeah.
So I think that also comes into play too with Micah, coming up a little behind Alana in that race.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go ahead and go into the animation too, because it's this. You almost forget it's a comic or graphic novel, right? Because you're so into the story and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
visually, I mean, this is definitely your art style. We've seen it before. How did you make that transition though to something a little bit more, let's say, kid friendly in
Yeah,
comparison to the
no,
last work?
oh, absolutely. It was toned down quite a bit
Yeah.
to try and capture that appeal that kids seem to like from, I mean, not just current art, but certainly the current, um, span or spat of graphic novels that all have very, appealing, soft style. So
Yeah.
I try to um, translate that to the style that I had kind of developed for a while, and I think it worked out well. But it was a huge part of that, a huge influence in that transition, was actually anime and manga, which is something that I came very late to in life.
Yeah.
It wasn't, I'm not to date myself too much, but it wasn't quite as ubiquitous when I was in school as it seemed to be for the generation behind me, where manga and anime was incredibly popular and was brought to the United States in a big way at that time. Where I don't think it really was. It was here, when I was in my teens, sort of the mid '90s. I know it was here because certain people had it, but it just didn't seem to have the cultural impact on the arts here in the United States
Yeah.
at that time than it does now. So my buddy, who's very familiar with my sensibilities and kind of, because I'm not huge on mech and monster stuff. That stuff is great too, and there's
Yeah.
certainly time and place for that. But my and which I think is pretty clear from the way that I write. My preferred genre is kind of slice of life.
Hmm.
So the three that were kind of the main became the main inspirations from manga and anime were Your Lie in April, Love is War, and Mix, which is the base one of the baseball series.
Yeah.
So I was watching the anime, and I know this is going to make me sound like such a rube when it comes to that style of animation, because I am. But there were these beautiful, these big emotions that were punctuated by incredible sort of abstract backgrounds. So I would kind of, do a screenshot to the best of my ability when something came up that I might have wanted to utilize later. And of course I didn't I didn't copy it or nick it, completely. I did,
Hmm.
turn it into my own style. But that was huge for me in making that, like you said, a little bit more animated, a little bit more maybe appealing to a younger audience. But animation is always an influence of mine. I was a kid when the animation renaissance happened with Ren and Stimpy and
Yeah.
SpongeBob SquarePants. Actually, I was around for Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures, where
Classic.
a lot of the guys who went on to create all the cartoons we know came from.
Yeah.
So that's always been a huge inspiration for me too. And people have noted for a long time that animation seems to have an effect on me, which it does. And
Yeah.
it's just such an exhilarating and kind of kinetic form of storytelling. So if I can, you know, take a little bit of that and put it on the comics page, that's what I'm trying to do in those moments, because it adds so much to the emotional sort of effect that it has on the reader too.
Hmm. Even I'm looking at page 140 here, but something that I think normally you would have multiple bubbles on one panel or something like that, a little bit more of a in-depth read. This is a conversation between son and mother, and it's one dialogue, one panel, and it's a much faster back and forth. I think is a lot more kind of Saturday morning cartoon style, where it's faster paced dialogue, keeping your attention while also getting into a really deep conversation, and it's a really a good mix of the two. I think.
Yeah, sort of that panning idea of back
Yeah,
and forth
exactly
between
that.
characters.
Yeah.
It's very much that I'm putting on that page. I'm employing that technique of sort of the panicked back and forth,
Yeah. Yeah, because
which
both of
is
them are like the same size, so it feels like real quick on
yeah,
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, okay, well, I'm glad that that came through because that was absolutely what I was going for. Because it does, like you said, it adds that added element of um, kind of not tension, but maybe frustration.
Yeah.
Because it's so quick, it's so rapid fire that it kind of makes you a little bit loony
Hmm.
from how fast that's coming at you, which is how it feels when you're having one of those conversations.
Exactly. Yeah. Both
So
sides are kind of right in their own mind, and they're just trying to get their point across.
yeah, and everybody's talking past each other.
Right.
Nobody, no actual productive conversation is happening. So
Yeah.
that was definitely something that I wanted to capture on there. But yeah, animation helped me, gave me, I think, the vocabulary to do that.
Hmm. Now, I wanted to make sure to give a shout out to a couple pages here that you dedicated to a story, and the art style is very different for these pages, of course.
So yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
what was your inspiration for these ones in particular? Is it something from your childhood?
It's a love of classic illustrated fairy tale books.
Hmm.
So there's this moment, and that's kind of early on, so I don't think that
Yeah, yeah.
too big of a spoiler for people, but the grandmother is telling the kids a fairy tale.
Hmm.
So I had been kind of racking my brain on how to depict that, how to portray that in the comic, because I think it could have been a very boring few pages where she's just sitting there, reading out of
Telling the
or
story.
reading up. Is the whole idea is she's kind of doing it on the fly, freestyle storytelling, as it were. And so, yeah, it took me a long time, and sometimes it does to come to terms with what you really want to do on that page. So I actually told this story at the book launch party, so I'm kind of happy that I get to share it here too. So my wife and I watched this series called What We Do in the Shadows. I
Love
don't
it.
know if you're familiar with it.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
So every so often, when they're talking about a certain thing, maybe they're talking about vampire history or they're talking about a certain character's past, and there will be these sort of woodcut looking illustrations that
Yeah.
pop up while they're talking about that. So my wife and I were sitting there watching it one night, and that was for some reason the light bulb going off moment for me. And I immediately kind of ran and scribbled down some ideas. And so it just ended up working that she's telling a fairy tale essentially of her own creation. So why not create some actual, old school classic pen and ink storybooks type illustrations to accompany them?
Yeah.
And it also gives you this kind of jolt, about whatever it is, a quarter into the book, or
Yeah.
maybe a little less, where you kind of you keep going and you have to keep looking back and think, did I just see that? Is that the
Yeah.
same artist? It's kind of fun to experiment with those styles too. Because that's, I mean, the nature of art is kind of experimental and fluid. So, giving yourself time, and I didn't have the most time when I was working on this art, but I think sometimes it's necessary to give yourself a little more time to figure something out because you have to get it just right. And
Yeah.
I feel very satisfied with how those few pages came out and how they actually do work inside the story.
You're right with that tonal shift too, because as soon as it switches to that, it's like when your grandparents used to tell you the stories. You're like, all right, settle in, we're in first, right? It's not very many pages, but it gets you in that mindset right immediately. It's like, okay, settle in. You're not going to go speed past this.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah, absolutely. And then so it sort of has the captions on there in a similar way that would be in the old fairy style or
Yeah.
fairy
Fairy
tale
tale.
style books with the big captions. The old, I think I had something like the old Hal Foster, Flash Gordon comics in mind when
Oh
I
wow.
was in. I'm also very, as I've talked about many times, I was weaned on the funnies and the Smithsonian collection of comic strips, so that has loomed pretty large in my artistic influence to my artistic toolbox. So I'm sure some of that was also calling to mind, but the main one was What We Do in the Shadows, funny enough.
Yeah. The rest of the book definitely does have some strong Sunday cartoons in
Mm,
the old newspapers vibe to it. So it definitely feels like that. And like you're saying, a slice of life for sure. And it was really one of the panels,
yeah.
I couldn't find the page for it. I absolutely love it, where you're discussing three different moments, but it's still just one Micah, and it's his clothes shifting in between the three
Oh,
panels.
right.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was so cool looking. That really turned out well done. That was good.
Thanks. Yeah, that's some, classic Wollywood, time shift tricks that you use in comics, and you just sort of adapt them to your own vibe. But yeah, that's a really cool trick that I haven't really used actually too much
Yeah.
in the past thinking about it. But for that moment, yeah, it was a great tool to use.
Yeah, it was one of them where I really kind of like, oh, that's cool. You noticed it, how well it was done. So it was good.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, let's start buttoning things up here. I want to make sure we get people headed in the right direction, and I want to see, for anybody who's interested in this book, what is one of the takeaways you want to make sure that people are pulling from this book when they're reading it?
I mean, what I've been saying is and this isn't getting political because I don't think it's a
Right.
political thing at all. I think it's a moral thing.
Hmm.
The world can feel very unloving right now.
Yeah.
And, while this is a love letter to my grandparents, love letter to Judaism, it's also a love letter to, the outsider kids, to the outcasts,
Yeah.
to the others, the ones who are meant to feel different when they're absolutely not, because there's no such thing as normal.
Right.
Uh, so it's what I really want people to take away from my books is that they are loved in a world that can feel particularly unloving sometimes, and certainly right now, because it can be tougher to show kindness, but if we all tried just a little bit more, I think the world would be a little bit better of a place.
Yeah.
So through the pages of these books, I'm trying to kind of tell the kids that you are loved, you're fine, you're normal, it'll be okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. You may feel like you're on the outs, but I like how Micah feels relatable on so many different levels. Even at my age, at old 38 years old, I still related to Micah, so that's perfect.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good to know that the youngsters still relate to me.
All right, guys. So it's The Effects of Pickled Herring. I'm gonna have the links in the bio for multiple different places you could buy this book. Preferably shop local if you can. You guys live here in Sacramento. We have so many wonderful
Bookstore.org.
shops. What's that?
Bookstore.org online
There.
is a way to order through your local bookstore. Sorry, I didn't
And
mean to interrupt.
no, that's perfect. Bookstore. Okay, I'm gonna make sure I add that because I didn't have that. Okay, that's perfect. So yes, please pick up this book. It is fantastic. Alex, where can people follow you online?
AlexSchumacher.com. I keep joking about it being a sorely neglected website, which it is, but the joke is that I still haven't gone back to really update it much, but I will be very shortly. So AlexSchumacherArt.com, Twitter at AJ Schumacher Art, Instagram at AJ Schumacher Art, and I'm on Facebook if you look up my
Okay.
name. I imagine there will be story notes where people can be
Yeah.
shown how to actually spell it correctly too.
Links in the description, guys. Make sure you click around and
Right.
follow everything. Yeah, I know you're still active on Twitter quite a bit, and over on Instagram now. I'm starting to see you on Instagram more and more. The feeds, it's like the feeds ignore people sometimes. I'm like, oh, that's right.
Yeah, until you look at them again, you find somebody. If you
Yeah.
click on one of their things, the algorithm says, "Okay, you want to look at them." And social media too is it's such this insidious thing in a lot of ways
Hmm.
because it's a necessary evil.
Right.
That's just a fact of our day and age where we have to be online, we have to be promoting online. But it's also important, and I think for younger artists to remember, because I have a lot of not a lot of, but I've had several younger artists, talk to me privately and lament the fact that they weren't getting more engagement or they weren't getting
Uh,
more likes, and that
yeah.
must mean that their work is garbage. And the truth of the matter is that that couldn't be further from the truth.
You're right.
Just mixed metaphors, but anyway, it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
There is real life, and social media is not real life. In real life, you are valued for making art, maybe not by everybody, but it's not about your numbers on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. If that's what you do, I do not. But that it's you have value regardless of whether or not you're recognized on social media. That's
Absolutely.
that's not self worth.
Yeah, and you've got to, if you enjoy what you're doing and you enjoy what you make, then that's the only person that matters. In my opinion, there's so many times where I have people like fellow podcasters that are like, "Oh, I wish I had more numbers." Did you have fun recording it? That's the part you got to ask yourself.
That's the whole point of creating art, is
Yeah,
it's for the self. And I know that in our society we have commoditized everything, and
yeah,
art unfortunately is no different. But you should still be creating for yourself, and you should be creating for that self satisfaction of having, pulled something out of thin air and
yeah.
breathed it into existence. You need to sit with that and marvel at what you've done, because it's incredible. If you've created anything, and I think we all should create something. Creation's better than destruction.
Yeah.
And the arts are so essential. So I'm going on a little bit of a tangent now, but
That's fair.
the point being, social media doesn't gauge you as an artist. You do, and the only person you're ever competing against is yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. Very well said. That's a good final marks there. Again, the effects of pickled herring, all the links in the description. Thank you very much, Alex, for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing me back on.
Of course. All right, everybody. We'll see you guys next week. Bye.